Chapter 16. August 21st, 2167, 1458 Set, Maitreya System, Alliance Listening Post, Petty Officer First Class, Lillian Adwill. Are you sure you want to do this? Yes, no matter what you say. All right, I go with you, and I want to see. Lillian heard something shuffle behind her as she half-heartedly concentrated on the monitor before her. Full house. Take that, said the second voice, Petty Officer Lucas Doran. She didn't even have to turn around to know that Doran had the biggest shit-eating grin on his face right now. Lillian also knew that he would probably lose it in another few seconds. A full house. Never expected that, said the first voice, Lieutenant Sarah Marigold, yet still not good enough to beat my four-of-a-kind hand. There it was. If there was one thing that Lillian had learned in this far-off listening post, then it had to be the fact that you just couldn't beat the lieutenant in any card game. Doran slapped his hand on the table in frustration and exclaimed, "How the hell? We're playing for an hour already, and the only time I won was when I got a royal flush. You got a four-of-a-kind 6 times already. You got to be cheating." Lieutenant Marigold chuckled and said, "I am cheating, but until you can prove it, I won't stop." At that, Lillian had to chuckle as well. It was an open secret among the crew of the listening post that Lieutenant Marigold cheated in poker games, since she openly admitted to it. Yet none of the crew ever found out how the lieutenant was cheating. Lillian had once asked why she was cheating, and Lieutenant Marigold had said that it was her way of making things more interesting. And since she never played with money on the table, nobody held any ill will against her. A notice on the monitor in front of her took Lillian's attention away from the argument behind her. With a quick swipe, she opened the link and looked at the incoming data from the relay. "We got another incoming ship," Lillian called out to the two bickering people behind her. Without much further ado, Doran and Lieutenant Marigold stopped arguing, and the lieutenant went to stand beside her. "Do we know from which direction it's coming?" she asked, her tone devoid of her previous amusement. "Seems like it's coming from the direction of hegemony space. Can't be sure that it is a hegemony ship, though. At least until it is in system and sends its identification," Lillian answered. "Keep me posted. Doran, be ready to send a message to the nearest patrol fleet." "Probably only a trade ship, but protocol is protocol," ordered Lieutenant Marigold. Doran snapped a sharp salute and went to his post to rouse the communications equipment from its standby mode. "Ship is through the relay and flies slowly towards the colony. 2 minutes until the results of our scanners come in," informed Lillian. Not that it will show something out of the ordinary, thought Lillian. Her deployment to this listening post neared the 6 months mark, and nothing interesting had ever happened during this time. After it was clear that the Citadel Council intended to approve the petition of the Batarians to open the relays into Alliance territory, the Alliance constructed hidden listening posts in all systems that bordered the Batarian hegemony. They were supposed to keep an eye on the ships coming from the newly opened relays. 9 months had gone by, and nothing but trade ships had come through. Every listening post had only one task: monitor the relay and inform the nearest fleet if something out of the ordinary happened. The listening post that monitored the Maitreya system was hidden in an asteroid belt. The Alliance hollowed out an asteroid and built a small base inside it. Due to the composition of the asteroids, the base needed special scanners to monitor the relay, since the standard ones had problems penetrating the unique magnetic fields of the asteroids. While that had caused problems when setting the base up, now it was an additional layer of defense so that the base stayed hidden. Still, due to the fact that the listening post was inside an asteroid, there wasn't much to do when not on duty. After all, leaving the base and exploring the surroundings, like at other bases, wasn't something one could do. In the end, Lillian used most of her free time to learn, since she wanted to sign up for the engineering courses the Alliance offered after her deployment ended. A ping signaled that the results were in, and Lillian opened them, not expecting anything different from the last 10 times. "The results are in," she called, getting Lieutenant Marigold's attention. "What do they say?" the lieutenant asked as she leaned forward to look at them by herself. "It's a Batarian trade ship, the Egonek. Our registers show that it came to this system to trade some luxury goods once before, 3 months ago, to be precise. But before Lieutenant Maringold could ask further questions about the ship or tell Darrin that he could put the communications equipment back on standby. Lillian noticed something in the saved data from the Igonek's last visit to the Matria system. She subconsciously let out a huh that got the lieutenant's attention. "What is it?" Lieutenant Maringold asked instantly. Before Lillian answered, she changed the display so that the scanning results from today and 3 months ago were displayed side by side. "There's an inconsistency right there," she said, pointing at the displayed information. "Every time a ship arrives through a relay, there is a change in the gravitational forces around the relay. This change is related to the mass a ship possesses. Some even suggest that the change is unique to every ship since no starship has the exact same mass. But our scanners aren't sophisticated enough to recognize such minuscule differences." "And now there is a visible difference. That's what you're saying, right?" asked the lieutenant. Lillian nodded slowly but without any hesitation. "There is enough difference to think that another ship arrived in the wake of the Igonek. If I had to guess, it's a small scout ship. Probably here to make sure that no patrol fleet is nearby," mused Lieutenant Maringold. "Very well. Darrin, send a message to the closest fleet. The 21st Patrol Fleet should only be a few systems away. Tell them we got an observer. The actual attack should happen in a week or less." "Attack, ma'am?" asked Darrin. "Yes, an attack," confirmed Lieutenant Maringold. "I'm sure that we will soon get a visit from independent slavers and pirates, and we would be poor hosts if we didn't prepare for their arrival." Lillian heard the mocking tone of the lieutenant loud and clear when she uttered the word independent. There was no such thing as an independent slaver or pirate close to Batarian space. They were either on the payroll of the hegemony or dead, since the Batarians tolerated no pirates that didn't belong to them. "What are our orders, ma'am?" asked Lillian. "Try to find the scout ship. Our scanners should be good enough for that, but make sure that they don't detect you. Also, keep an eye on the relay, while I'm sure that the attack isn't going to happen as long as the Batarian trade ship is here. Plausible deniability and all that. I'm not going to take any chances." "Couldn't it be that it's just the STG noising around?" asked Darrin, while tipping at his console to establish a connection to the closest fleet. "Only if the STG sent rookies," scoffed Lieutenant Maringold. "And that's not something they would do. Nothing against your abilities, Lillian, but trained STG agents wouldn't make such an amateurish mistake." "None taken, ma'am," said Lillian nonchalantly. "When you finish contacting the patrol fleet, I want you to establish a connection with our garrison on the colony. I'll talk to the major myself," said Lieutenant Maringold to Darrin, who nodded. "And then," continued the lieutenant, "we wait and enjoy the show that follows. It will be great to see these slaver scums taken down a peg or two." Lillian could only agree with her. There wasn't much they could do but observe the battle that was sure to come. "At least we got the best seats in the house for that," thought Lillian, before concentrating on her new task of finding the scout ship. August 27, 2167, 1623 CT, en route to the Matria system, SSV Madrid, patrol carrier, Hangar Bay, Flight Lieutenant 2nd Class Mitchell Everdeen. Mitchell closed the diagnosis program with a satisfied nod. Everything was running as it should, and all systems were in order. Nothing was more embarrassing than dying because of a system failure in the middle of battle. A look around the hangar bay revealed that he was one of the last to finish, but still in the allotted time frame. The pilots that had already finished their pre-flight checks stood in neat rows waiting for the flight commander to give his orders. Mitchell looked over his A-wing fighter one last time before making his way to the line that belonged to Gold Squadron, his squadron. When he arrived, he took his place as the third person in the line, befitting his designation as Gold 3. Now it was a waiting game. Fortunately, it didn't take long for the rest to finish their pre-flight checks and find their own places in the rows. Mitchell could see how the flight commander came towards them with quick steps. "Attention!" called Flight Commander Burson when he arrived, and Mitchell, like everyone else, straightened up. "We're 10 minutes out, and all reports indicate that we the slavers have almost arrived at the outer perimeter of the colony. By the time we arrive in the system, the Colonial Defense Force will have already engaged these slaver scums. So check your targets when you're out there. The CDF will keep them occupied at the front while we hit them from the flank. Red and Gold Squadrons, you're taking the fight to them. said FC Burson while looking at Mitchell's line and the one left to them. Sir, yes, sir, everyone called out at the same time to an unspoken command. With a nod, the commander continued giving orders to the remaining 2 squadrons. Blue and Silver squadrons, your task is to keep enemy forces from getting too close to our ships. If something that our IFFs don't recognize comes close, take it down. Another sir, yes sir, echoed through the hangar bay, and Commander Burson allowed himself a small smile. All right, he called out, get to your fighters. I want them ready for takeoff in 2 minutes, and Godspeed out there. It took Mitchell not even 20 seconds before he arrived back at his fighter, opening the cockpit with a command of his Omni tool before arriving. He climbed onto the side of his fighter and was inside the cockpit within 3 steps. With one hand, he grabbed the handle to close the cockpit, and with the other, he started the warm-up sequence of the engine. In less than a minute, all starting procedures were finished, and just to be sure, Mitchell started the diagnosis program once again. A melodic ping notified him that the diagnosis was finished. It showed a slight imbalance in the power distribution between the 2 propulsion units, a problem that was solved with a flick of the wrist. He took the helmet to his left and put it on, sealing his combat suit. If his cockpit got damaged during the fight, it would keep him alive until he could return to the SSV Madrid. The HUD started up in a brilliant blue tone, and within seconds, it appeared as if he wasn't even wearing a helmet at all. The small cameras on the outside of the helmet creating a full view inside it. On the right side of the HUD was a countdown with less than 80 seconds on it, the remaining time until the SSV Madrid arrived in the Metria system. All his preparations were finished, so the only thing that Mitchell could do was wait. He closed his eyes to relax and mentally prepare for what was to come. A crackle echoed inside his helmet as Flight Lieutenant First Class Roger Wendon, also known as Gold Leader, spoke to his squadron over the radio. 20 seconds till entry. We'll be out there in 20 more. We'll approach enemy forces in V formation. After engaging them, Gold 2 and Gold 3 will keep close to my wings. We concentrate on taking out the shields of their heavy hitters. Gold 4, Gold 5. You keep an eye out for anyone coming too close to us. Understood? Understood, replied Mitchell and the other 3 members of Gold Squadron. The next minute passed like a blur to Mitchell. 1 second he was still waiting for the SSV Madrid to arrive in the Metria system. The next, he was firing up his engines to fly out of the hangar bay. His HUD showed him where Gold Lead and Gold 2 were flying, and he steered his fighter into position to the left and slightly behind Gold Lead. They accelerated their approach to the fight in the distance the moment Gold 4 and Gold 5 were in formation. Do we know if the slavers have already made landfall? Asked Gold 2. They haven't, replied Gold Lead. The CDF fleet and the ODPs have done an admirable job keeping the pirates away. They're taking losses, but with us here now, the outcome of this fight is guaranteed. 10 enemy fighters are coming towards us, called Gold 4, and Mitchell could see how they were highlighted on his HUD. Gold 4, Gold 5, accelerated by 5% and go up. Gold 2, Gold 3, 3% and down. I want them to meet in X formation. Copy that. Mitchell gave more energy to the propulsion units and directed his fighter slightly down. With a quick look, he saw that the enemy fighters were in no kind of formation and just flying towards them. Engage, called Gold Leader the moment Gold Squadron was in range to use their weapons with precision. Mitchell had already picked his first target and had lined up his shot to take the fighter down. Thankfully, with the help of the HUD and its integrated programs, there was no confusion about who would take which target. His thumb pushed the fire button on his controller, and the guns on each side of his fighter did the rest. Almost simultaneously, 5 enemy fighters exploded in a fiery spectacle. While the explosions were completely silent due to the vacuum of space, Mitchell could hear them inside his head. With another acceleration of their fighters, Gold Squadron passed the enemy line and continued towards the pirate ships still engaged with the CDF. A few glancing blows had hit Mitchell's fighter, reducing his shields by a small margin, but nothing too serious since they were already climbing back to their previous levels. Should we turn back and take care of the rest? Asked Gold 5. Negative, replied Gold Lead. Red Squadron was directly behind us. I'm sure they clean up after us. Gold Lead was proven right. Moments after he said it, Mitchell's HUD displayed the destruction of 4 fighters. and the last one survived only a few seconds longer. A small smirk of satisfaction appeared on Mitchell's face at the end of these scums. "We have to hurry," called Goldlead. "The second ODP is down, and the CDF cruiser is almost dead in the water. We concentrate on the outmost frigate to start." The only answer that Goldlead got was the return of Gold Squadron into the V formation and the steady approach towards the enemy. "Begin attack now," called Goldlead when they were only 100 kilometers away. Gold 4 and Gold 5 broke the formation and would circle around, keeping an eye out for more enemy fighters, since they couldn't do much against the anti-fighter batteries on the frigate. Mitchell steered his fighter closer towards Goldlead, and Gold 2 did the same. A glancing blow hit his fighter, and Mitchell looked worriedly at his shield energy. "Be careful," he said. "I just lost a fourth of my shielding to a glancing blow. 1 or 2 direct hits, and that's it for us." "Understood, Gold 3, replied Goldlead. "My target computer finished its calculations. Rockets away in 5. A blue line appeared on Mitchell's HUD to show the attack vector he was supposed to fly to shield Goldlead from stray attacks. "Rockets away," called Goldlead when they neared the end of this displayed line. While Mitchell couldn't see the impact of the rockets, he knew how it must have looked. A red-orange explosion intermingled with blue streaks. The blue originated from the traces of E0 that were used in the production of the shieldbreaker rockets. The purpose of these rockets wasn't to completely take down the shields of a ship. Instead, they just opened a hole big enough for the targeting systems of the larger starships. This was possible due to the fact that when the shield breakers exploded, the EZO in them disrupted the frequency of most shield emitters. "The SSV Attila is targeting the hole. We should put some distance between us and their target," said Gold 2. "I'm on board with this plan," quipped Mitchell. "No time for jokes yet. Our next target is the cruiser. Red Squadron lost Red 2 and Red 5 taking down the other frigate. We take down the cruiser, and the battle is as good as won," reprimanded Goldlead. "We follow you, Goldlead," said Gold 2. They increased the distance between us and the pirate frigate, and a few moments after they cleared the minimal safe distance informed them, Gold 4, that the SSV Attila fired upon the frigate. It didn't go down in a fireball like the fighters they destroyed on their approach. Rather, it was a quiet death, as the shots of the SSV Attila destroyed the hull of the pirate frigate and hit the life support systems. The atmosphere inside the ship was vented into the unforgiving emptiness of space, and the slavers died a death by suffocation. "The cruiser is mostly occupied with keeping the CDF and the SSV Caesar at bay, so we should fly under their radar," said Goldlead. "Follow the attack vector." Another blue line appeared on Mitchell's HUD, and the 3 fighters followed their respective vectors. They were halfway to the cruiser when suddenly the anti-fighter batteries increased their rate of fire. While none hit Mitchell's fighter directly, the shots were too close for comfort, and with a worried look, he saw that his shield's energy fell into the lower levels of the yellow zone. Before he could inform Goldlead that he had to abort the attack run, Goldlead's fighter exploded directly in front of him. Without waiting for any order, Mitchell wrenched the controller up to get out of the line of fire. "Fuck!" he cursed. "What the hell happened?" "I think they diverted the energy from their engines to the shield and weapon systems," Gold 2 guessed. "They probably don't think they can escape, so they want to go down fighting. Never thought pirates capable of something like that. Don't forget, they're probably pirates sponsored by the Batarian hegemony. This isn't about glory, it's about covering their tracks." A short moment of silence passed between them, and Mitchell watched as his shields climbed back up after they dipped shortly into the red. "Just got a message from command. I'm now Goldlead," said Gold 2, now christened Goldlead. "The SSV Attila flies into a position where she can hit the cruiser from below. We're breaking the shield there. The underside should have fewer anti-fighter batteries." "Should?" questioned Gold 4, who just positioned himself on the right side of Goldlead as his second wingman. "Yes, should," said Goldlead in a tone that didn't tolerate any backtalk. "Let's do this," interjected Mitchell. "Those assholes scratched the paint job on my baby. I want payback." A chuckle was shared between the members of Gold Squadron, and Mitchell smiled in satisfaction. His joke was meant to lift the mood of his squad, even if just slightly, and he succeeded in that. "Gold 3 has the right of it," agreed Goldlead. "Attack vector is computed. Let's show them why Gold Squadron is one of the best the Alliance has." They flew in a tight formation, and while the enemy fire was heavy, it wasn't as bad as before. "Rockets away," called Goldled, and at his call, Mitchell steered to the left, away from the pirate cruiser. Taking advantage of the newly opened hole in the cruiser's shields, the SSV Attila mercilessly fired its main cannon, and the shell punched right through the cruiser, coming out on the other side. It seemed like it hit something vital, and an explosion blossomed inside the cruiser, breaking it into two pieces. "Our job is done, gentlemen," said Goldled. "Let's get back to the Madrid. First rounds on me." September 3rd, 2167, 1534 Set, Arcturus Station. Oscar Dennebrun's office. Oscar Dennebrun, Minister of Economy. In the course of the last week, 4 different human colonies came under attack by pirate and slaver groups operating out of the Terminus systems. The attacks on the colonies Lovell, Mindwar, and Concordia were stopped by the Alliance Navy before the pirates could land on the planets. Sadly, the attack on the farming colony of Becca couldn't be stopped there. A handful of pirate ships slipped by the blockade of the CDF and made landfall. The local marine garrison was understaffed and couldn't prevent the slavers from attacking civilians with the intention of capturing them. After the 37th Patrol Fleet arrived in the system and annihilated the remaining pirate presence in space, the onboard marine contingent took it upon themselves to make sure that the fighting on the planet ended. Military representatives commiserate that it came to civilian losses, but emphasize that no human was enslaved. The backgrounds of the attack are still being investigated. This was Antonia Wencroft for Ann N. The moment the report finished, I silenced the TV and turned towards Andrew, who sat in the armchair beside me. "The news has no new information, do you?" I asked with a raised eyebrow. Andrew snorted and answered, "Of course I have." He didn't say anything else, and I kept my eyes on him until he relented with a sigh. "You take all the fun out of it, you know." He sighed. "It's as we guessed. The Batarians sponsored these raids. We followed the money trail back to a Batarian noble with a passion for exotic slaves. He's the one who paid the slavers, but other nobles financed them too. We're still collecting information on them. We can't let this attack go unpunished, but open warfare isn't the way I would want to go. Michael, too, doesn't want open war with the Batarian hegemony. Our relationship with the Citadel isn't strong enough to prevent them from interfering in this event. The Batarians have been a part of the Citadel for more than a century and kept the Terminus systems in check for the Council. The Council won't want to lose this for a species that hasn't been part of the Citadel for long. The Turians would stay neutral. They have no love left for the Batarians," I said. "They would probably support us," mused Andrew. "They wouldn't speak out about it to avoid conflict with the Asari and Solarians." Andrew lifted his glass and took a sip of water to drench his dry throat. For 3 days, Andrew had to fight a slight cold, and it annoyed him greatly. After he put his glass back down, he continued, "From our contacts on the Citadel, I've heard that there are voices in the Solarian and Asari government that call the attack on us predictable, for foolishly colonizing planets close to the Attican Traverse." "Foolish, you say?" I scoffed. "If I'm not mistaken, they have colonies right at the border to the Terminus systems, and they have the gall to call us foolish. Only the hope that the Batarians gain a council seat in the future keeps them from attacking these colonies. In any other case, they would have been attacked by pirates and slavers almost constantly." "Yes, you're correct," agreed Andrew. "And the few pirates that dare are fended off by the Turians. Their arrogance and stupidity surprise me again and again. They can't even defend their own colonies without outside help. Sometimes I can't help but wonder why the Turians are allowing this. I had wondered about this too, ever since I played the Mass Effect games. Why would the strongest military in the galaxy let themselves be treated like this? Only after the Alliance joined the Citadel, and I took the time to read more about Turian culture, I understood why. Duty and dependence, I answered Andrew's unasked question. It's an integral part of their culture to accomplish the tasks they're given, and right now they're tasked with defending Citadel space. That is a duty they won't shirk for anything, and their dependence is self-explanatory. The Volus are responsible for their economy, and they connected it to the Asari and Solarian economies that it would take half a millennium to gain their independence. I see, said Andrew, but it seems like we strayed from our original topic. I have a proposal for which I would like your support when I present it to Michael. What proposal? While we can't have a hot or even cold war with the Batarian hegemony, we can still launch shadow operations inside their territory. Spec ops teams trained in clandestine operations and asset denial take care of the Batarian nobles that dared to finance the attack on us. It should be easy to cover our tracks for this. And with the blackmail we have on the council for breaking the treaty and sending a specter without informing us, they will keep quiet even if they learn about it. But I don't think that this is all you thought of. Of course not, said Andrew with a wolfish grin. I recently came across some interesting information. The leadership of the Batarian hegemony may pretend that the Batarians are united under their banner and that everything is under their control, but nothing could be further from the truth. He held up a datapad, but made no move to hand it to me. I had no intention to take it, since I knew that Andrew would tell me himself what was on this datapad. There are two factions inside the hegemony that protest against their current way of life. One of them is composed of Batarians that want to do away with slavery altogether, mostly Batarians from the middle-class castes and minor nobility. They are heavily influenced by the Citadel. Probably as an attempt to weaken the Batarians from within, I mused. To keep the Batarians from amassing too much power? I thought so too. Anyway, this group pops up every now and then and is put down just as quickly. Ultimately, they're of no concern. At least, I wouldn't support them without finding a leader among them who can last longer than a few months. So I guess you would rather support the second group then? What do they represent? Andrew turned towards me, grinned and said, religion. A shiver went down my spine at his words. Are you sure you want to do this? I questioned apprehensively. Religion isn't something that you can underestimate. One wrong move and you create religious fanatics that can hurt you just as easily as the enemy you want them to fight. Don't worry, I will take care of anyone that walks in that direction. Furthermore, even the fanatics would treat their slaves better than the Batarian nobles do right now. I found this old religious text, written in an older dialect of Kurshan. In it, they describe that a slave owner as something like a shepherd, and his duty is to make sure that his flock is taken care of. I want to use this to create tension between the castes. If the Batarian leadership has to concentrate on avoiding civil unrest, then they will have less time for planning attacks on us and, even more importantly, their relations with the rest of the Citadel. So that's your plan, I exclaimed. You want to isolate the hegemony from the Citadel so that they lose favor with the powers that be. And if all goes well, grinned Andrew, make them leave the Citadel altogether. At this, I couldn't help but return Andrew's grin. In my opinion, the Batarians had too much influence on the Citadel. They could send pirates and slavers into our territory, and no matter how much evidence would turn up, their allies would help them to make it seem like they had nothing to do with it. During the few times I had been to the Citadel, there was one thing I learned. One needs allies and friends on all levels. The Citadel Council may be the highest authority, but even they couldn't do everything by themselves. It didn't matter if the government was a democracy, an oligarchy, a tyranny, or even a monarchy. It also didn't matter if it was just a small country or an empire spanning the whole galaxy. In the end, there would always be paperwork, and those working behind the scenes to make the government work smoothly. And it was those people that could get you what you want faster than most. More discreet, too. For now, I had only a few contacts in the bureaucratic machine of the Citadel, a circumstance that I wanted to change in the near future. Already, a low-level clerk owed me a favor that I would use to find out who I could approach for a special exception permit. Still, I said, concentrating on the conversation again, I think you have to be careful if you go the religious route. As I said, fanatics could be as dangerous to us as for the Batarians, and there's no guarantee that they would only pop up on our side. There's a chance that we could create die-hard fanatics that want to enslave the species of the galaxy even more than the Batarians already want. I don't want to be the guy that dooms a part of the galaxy by accident. Don't worry, laughed Andrew. I'll keep a close eye on the situation, and if it's necessary, I'll call the cavalry. While I still wasn't convinced by Andrew's plan, we had no feasible alternatives, and to do nothing would sit wrong with me. So after I took a generous gulp of my water, I answered the question that Andrew had asked close to the beginning of our conversation. All right, I support you when you bring your plans to Michael. Wonderful, said Andrew, clapping his hands. But we still have to talk about how these attacks affect the upcoming elections. What is there to say? I asked annoyedly. They came at a most inopportune timing. Personally, I would have preferred if the attacks came a few months later. I had expected that the Batarians had at least enough self-control to wait more than a year before doing something like this. And now? Now Terra Firma is using the attacks to spread its influence, especially among the outer colonies. After the elections, they will have enough power in the parliament to make things difficult for us. Yet, we're coming out of this election as the winners. Our candidate will be president. Yes, Amelia May will make a good president. I have no doubts about that. It's just that I won't continue as Minister of Economy under her leadership. That's news to me, said Andrew, both his eyebrows rising in surprise. How did that happen? I shot him a smirk and said, Amelia does not have the support Michiel did. Michiel could decide even unpopular things despite the protest from the other two factions inside the Alliance Parliament. Amelia can't do that. Furthermore, we want to prevent people to think that our party is too powerful. She wants to show that our party can work together with the other two and that their opinions matter. So I said I would step back from my position after the next election. I won't disappear from the political arena if you're worried about that. I just want to change my battleground. Let me guess, Andrew said. You want to go to the Citadel, build up your connections there. Correct, I agreed. I think that I need to be on the Citadel for the next few years. I'll try to support Anita as much as I can from the background while trying to establish my own connections with the political and economical players of the other species. Besides, it's time to concentrate on my business again. They have not seen much growth in the last few years, at least if we take into account that the galaxy suddenly became so much bigger. Andrew and I shared a chuckle at my attempt at a joke. I think you will do well on the Citadel, said Andrew, and Anita can use all the help she can get. I met the guy she got as an understudy, Donald Udina. I don't like that man. He jumps from overly aggressive and demanding to ass-kissing in the blink of an eye. I just smiled at Andrew's description of Udina, holding back my own thoughts on him. When I played the games for the first time, there was no person that I disliked as much as Donald Udina, but that had been when I was just a boy, a few months short of being 16. The older I got, and the more I thought about Udina's actions in the games, I grew to understand some of them, at least from a certain point of view. Not that it made him a more likable character, I just could understand some of his motives. Is there something else to discuss? I asked, turning towards my desk where a small light was blinking, signaling that I had a new message, or probably a dozen new messages. Only one more topic, said Andrew, and as he leaned forward I could see that it was a serious topic. Cerberus was all he said, and I knew that this topic was indeed serious. Since Andrew showed me their manifest years ago, I hadn't really thought about them, trusting Andrew to keep them in check. If he was the one to bring it up, then it must be important. I leaned back in my armchair, trying to relax, and said, Shoot. Fortunately, they didn't do anything overt that could put us in a bad light with the other members of the Citadel. Most of our own citizens don't even know they exist, yet it is those that know which worry me. Our agents inside Cerberus informed me that after the attacks, large amounts of money found their way into Cerberus's hands. Materials too. Furthermore, they're recruiting more and more people. They have always been cautious of who they asked to join, and it was only 1 out of 10 that actually joined. Now, that number is up to 4 or 5 out of 10. I've got a feeling that it won't be long before people are actively searching for them with the intent of joining. That's something we can't stop right now, Meowing, I said, my displeasure visible on my face. Officially, the Alliance doesn't know that Cerberus exists, or at least hasn't acknowledged its existence. Until we do, there's nothing we can do. Besides, at this point, we can't even claim Cerberus to be a terrorist organization or a criminal one. As far as I know, they haven't committed any crimes. What is the general attitude towards the Alliance among their personnel? That's something I'm interested in. Andrew took a moment to think about what I had said. At one point, he looked ready to interrupt me, but didn't do it in the end. Instead, he leaned back inside his armchair, took a sip of water, and answered my question. It depends. On the lower level, There's some grumbling about the Alliance joining the Citadel. They think we're too close to the aliens and that we're losing our independence to them. After the pirate attacks, they were more outspoken about it, but nothing of significance. It's nothing surprising since the lower levels are composed of people inclined to xenophobia. Still, in the end, they think they're thinking that the Alliance is doing its job well enough. If we hadn't reacted to the attacks as well as we did, they would sing other tunes, but, well. And what about the middle level, or even the leadership, I asked curiously. My agents haven't infiltrated the higher levels yet. They hear rumors but don't know much. The middle levels are not so different from the lower ones. It's just that they understand that joining the Citadel is a move to get more safety for our people. They don't like it, but they understand it. Heard anything about their leader? This elusive man? You mean Jack Harper? Asked Andrew with a cocky grin. That took me by surprise. I hadn't expected anyone would find out the elusive man's name. My surprise must have shown on my face since Andrew's grin grew even bigger. I cleared my throat and asked, "You found out his name? How? Do you know anything more about him?" Andrew's grin dimmed a bit. I didn't find out much about him. I heard from a rumor that he was on Shang-Chi when the Turians invaded and that he fought against them. I checked the registers of the people that were on the planet at that time. Most of them could be accounted for, dead and survivors. A few were missing, presumed dead, so I started there. I found a report by a lieutenant of the local Marine force that died in the defense. It spoke of a mercenary trio, among them one Jack Harper. When I tried to find out more about him, I discovered that someone was deleting everything concerning Jack Harper. Public records, medical files, even his birth certificate. He covered his tracks well. Basically, he doesn't even exist anymore. But I'm up to 90% sure that he's our man. If he's mentioned in one military report, shouldn't there be others mentioning him as well? I questioned. Yes, there should be. If he worked together with our forces on Shang-Chi, then there should be some. Orders, after action reports, and the like. Yet I found his name in only one. The only option to how that's possible is that he has friends or agents in the Alliance military, answered Andrew. We got people in his organization, he got people in ours. Seems like a fair deal to me, I quipped. Yep, that's how it goes, sighed Andrew. Don't have to like it, though. Anything else? I asked. Yes, one more thing, said Andrew, leaning forward. You said that Cerberus hasn't done any crimes that we can pin on them, and that's a reason why they get so many recruits at this time. They portray themselves as the guard dog of humanity. Well, we're about to show the world that they're not as good as they like to think of themselves. My hand stopped on its way toward my water glass when I heard that. Until now, there had been no action against Cerberus from the side of the Alliance. Something that was about to change, it seems. What's going to happen? I asked, my water completely forgotten. My agents got back to me about a facility researching how biotics develop in people. She hadn't any more detailed information than that. Just that what was happening there wasn't something that we could condone. I coordinated with Admiral Wright that a team of N5 would lead the raid. The team is already in place, and the operation begins in less than 3 hours. Why haven't I heard about that before? I asked, a little annoyed that I only heard about it now. We got the information only yesterday. Time was of the essence, and you were in meetings the whole day. Besides, it isn't your field of expertise, and you hadn't a need to know, chastised Andrew. I rubbed the back of my head sheepishly. Sorry, you're right. There's nothing I could have done anyway. I just like to be kept in the loop. I'm keeping you in the loop right now, said Andrew, before a grin appeared on his face. Besides, when you become the Alliance's ambassador on the Citadel, you'll be informed of such things right away. Me, ambassador? I exclaimed. I never told Andrew or anyone else that I had my eye on this position. Sure, why else would you go to the Citadel after the next election? If you just wanted to expand your business, you could have done that from Terra Nova just as well. And those connections you spoke of, while they will help Anita, you will get even more out of them. Furthermore, you know my opinion of Udna. I would rather see you in that position than him. That's not as big a vote of confidence as you seem to believe, I said with narrowed eyes. You would rather have the janitor as an ambassador than Udna. Andrew threw back his head and laughed at my joke. That's true, he said after he calmed down again. But still, I think you would make a good ambassador. You got my support when you throw your hat into the ring after Anita retires. As far as I know, she would support your candidacy too. Great, I said, relieved that I already had one person in my corner when the time came. A short moment of silence passed between us before Andrew stood up from his armchair to say goodbye. We both still got work to do. I want to keep an eye on the operation and start to prepare our plans for the Batarians. I'll send you a message when I'm ready to talk with Michael about it. Well then, see you later, Andrew, I said and held my hand out after I stood up from my chair. He shook it and after a friendly nod left my office. I turned towards my desk and saw that the color of my message notification light had turned yellow, signaling that there were a lot of new messages for me. I couldn't help but sigh. Perhaps I should take a short vacation after the next election instead of heading to the Citadel directly. September 3rd, 2167. 1854 set, 3:54 local time. Classified. Lieutenant Amanda Keyes, N5, classified team. Breath in, hold it, breath out. Slow and careful so that nobody, not even those standing beside her, could hear it. It was one of the many things that Amanda had learned during her training, all for the sake of reducing your very presence. Some would find it ridiculous that she took such care that her breathing couldn't be heard when the only people in a 100-meter radius around her were her two teammates, Lieutenants Birch and Goswell. Amanda would have scoffed at those precautions too, at least, before she joined the N School. Training at the N School wasn't like basics, far from it. To compare those two is like comparing a jog in the park to a triathlon. Both have something to do with running, and that's it. After every level of the N School, you either carved the training into your being or left the N School altogether. Amanda had seen recruits that scored higher than her after the pre-training course, also called the N0 course, yet those same people often only finish the N2 or N3 course. Her drill sergeant once told her that while the first two levels of the N School would forge good soldiers into great ones, its true purpose was to see who had the potential to go even further. She knew exactly what he had been talking about. While it was true that only the best passed the N0 course and were invited to the N1 course, physical prowess and being a good soldier wasn't enough. Their trainer looked for those that kept some of their independence that basics tried to stamp out. Furthermore, a flexible mind was needed to pass the hidden tests that were given to the trainees. These hidden tests were often the reason why many people dropped out after finishing the N2 course. The N School had no need for meatheads. A short vibration at her wrist yanked her from her memories to the here and now. Amanda, just like the others, got the signal from Overwatch that the operation was a go. Slowly, she changed her position from lying on the forest floor to a crouch. Her rifle, the AR Wright 2S, at the ready, she glanced quickly to her left to see that Birch and Goswell had done the same. Goswell gestured with his left hand that they would make their way to the complex in front of them slowly, its lights almost blinding in the dark of the night. The forest around them may not have been the densest, but there was enough cover for their team to approach the building complex unseen. When they arrived at the edge of the forest, Goswell gave the signal to lie down again. They observed the building carefully, and Amanda could see 4 guards patrolling the perimeter, 2 on the ground and 2 on the roof. Their silhouettes were colored red by her HUD to show them as enemy forces. A quick look at the mini-map in the lower left corner of her HUD showed her that there were 4 more guards on the other side of the building. She didn't concern herself with them. They were the problems of Alpha and Bravo. Suddenly, one of the red silhouettes started to pulse, telling her that Overwatch had decided to assign this target to her for neutralization. Amanda observed how her target moved during his patrol before she gave the signal that she was ready. She scoffed internally at the guard's repetitive pattern. Sloppy, she thought. It took another minute before all 9 dots in the upper right of her HUD changed to green, signaling that everyone was ready to take their shot. A countdown appeared in front of her, announcing the last seconds of her target in this life. When the countdown neared 0, Amanda took a deep breath and held it. She lined up her shot, and when the countdown showed 0, she pulled the trigger. 3 muffled shots sounded simultaneous, the noises which the silencers on their rifles couldn't completely negate. were absorbed by the surrounding foliage. While she could see how her target fell to the ground after getting shot in the head, the only information she had about the others were the dots on her mini-map. She watched the body of her target for a moment longer to make sure he was neutralized before she signaled that her target was dead, his dot on the mini-map disappearing with all the others. Amanda and her team moved towards the building until they stood by the wall. Goswell pointed his index finger upwards, indicating that they would climb on the roof. Their job was to secure an escape route, while Alpha and Bravo would search the building. At the same time, they would make sure that the inhabitants of the building had no access to any kind of long-range communication, keeping the complex isolated. For that reason, Birch carried a mobile jammer on his back. Amanda took a small tube from her belt and pointed it toward the roof. After pressing the button on the side of it, a cable shot out of it, and its tip buried itself into the roof. She pulled a few times to make sure that the cable would hold her weight before she looked towards Goswell, who gave her a nod. They climbed fast but silently, arriving on the roof in mere seconds. Immediately she turned toward the forest, scanning for any enemies that may have followed them. Behind her, Goswell hurried to the other side to give Alpha and Bravo the signal to proceed, while Birch went to the middle of the roof to place the jammer down and activate it. Now it was a waiting game, until they got the confirmation from Alpha and Bravo that the building was secured. Briefly, her thoughts turned towards what they would find in this complex, and if it was worth sending so many N5S. But she discarded the thought quickly. Instead, she tried to get comfortable in her position. After all, who knew how long they would stay here? Chapter 17. September 3rd, 2167, 1916 Set, 0416 local time. Classified, Lieutenant Commander Niles Smith, N5. 2 muffled shots got fired and 2 bodies dropped to the ground. There were no cries of surprise or pain, and the alarm didn't start blaring. Everything was nice and quiet. That was how Niles liked his operations to go, without any problems. It wasn't like his team couldn't win a full-blown firefight, far from it. After all, they were N5 and even slated to undergo further training in the N6 course. So it wasn't their ability that made Niles reluctant to engage enemies directly. Being stealthy had just many more advantages. If one overlooked that this mission was supposed to be as quiet as possible, then one just had to look at the obvious advantages of doing this quietly. If the enemy didn't know you were there, then the element of surprise would be on your side. Ending a fight before it really begins was easy with it on your side. This, in turn, would reduce the chance of getting wounded in battle. No matter how skilled one was, a lucky shot could still kill you, and while Medigel was good, it couldn't bring one back from death's door. The best it could do in those times was to keep you alive long enough that a trained medic or doctor could help you. So no matter what people say about scars being the proof of a fighter, Niles preferred to get his team through their missions without adding new ones to their already impressive collections. Besides, it would be detrimental to their mission to get spotted by the enemy right now. Bravo team had entered the building on its northern side to be closer to the staircase leading to the upper floors, where the intel reports said the laboratories were. They were supposed to locate the main laboratory and gather information about what exactly Cerberus was doing in them. If they came into contact with any scientists, they were to subdue them so that the researchers could be interrogated about their work later. In the meantime, Alpha Team, Niles' team, would infiltrate the server rooms and download everything that looked important. Intel hadn't been sure of the security features of the servers, and if it was possible to shut them down from afar, but if they got spotted, most of the data would be irrevocably destroyed when they arrived there, especially since the server rooms were in the second basement, and on the floor above them were the guards' barracks. It just needed one person to initialize the erasing procedure while the other guards would block their way. The moment Niles' team arrived, there would be nothing left. The problem was that there was no direct way to the server rooms. The whole building had been constructed with the idea of delaying invaders. Individual staircases connected the floors with each other, making it impossible to reach the second basement from the ground floor without crossing the first basement. The same was true for the upper floors. It would make the evacuation harder too, but Niles was sure that the key personnel knew about hidden service ladders to escape quickly. Niles felt a tap on his back from Anya, his second-in-command, asking if everything was all right. He nodded sharply and pointed at the two bodies in front of them. Even without further elaboration, Anya understood what Niles wanted to say. She relayed to George, their third teammate, that they would drag the bodies into an empty room to hide them. George didn't need to know anything more and started to make his way to one of the bodies. While Anya and George dragged the bodies away, Niles checked if there were any obvious blood traces. After all, nothing screams that something happened as loud as a pool of blood. Satisfied that there were no hints that something had happened, Niles moved towards the hallway's corner to listen for any patrols. He closed his eyes to concentrate on his hearing, listening for any footsteps, but the only thing he heard was the soft pounding of his heart. There were two reasons why he communicated with his teammates nonverbally. The first one was that they could focus on their surroundings much better without the additional noise from speaking. After all, one never knew what they could fail to hear during their conversations. Hearing the footsteps of a guard in advance or not could spell the success or failure of a mission. The second one was that even if their in-helmet communicators prevented their voices from being heard by others, the radio waves could still be detected by the right equipment. In the worst case, their enemy could even hack into their communicators and listen to their plans. Nonverbal communication had no such disadvantages. Furthermore, Niles liked how this way of communication forced them to adapt their behavior. Orders, questions, and answers had to be precise and to the point due to the limited vocabulary of hand gestures. No move could be wasted when relaying something of importance to the mission. If one compared the time it took to say, "There are 3 enemies spread out in the room," and the gestures for enemies, 3 spread out, the latter one would win. Besides, training the nonverbal communication with his team had led to more than one enjoyable evening when they tried to form the silliest sentences possible. At the memory of their last training session, a smile darted over his face before it disappeared just as fast. Right now wasn't the time to recall fond memories. They had a mission to accomplish. The opening of a door alerted him that his team had finished hiding the bodies of the 2 Cerberus soldiers. He didn't need to look back to see that they positioned themselves behind him when he got ready to turn around the corner. In a fluid motion, he stepped out into the open. He checked the corridor for any possible enemies with his rifle at the ready. Not seeing any, he nodded once and slowly went forward, knowing that his teammates would follow him. He didn't lower his rifle for even a second, securing the front. George did the same on the other end, walking backward, while Anya switched between looking at every door they passed. The group moved slowly but steadily. Niles's eyes flew over a camera on the ceiling, positioned to watch over the part of the corridor where the door to the staircase that would lead them to the first basement was. For a moment, he worried that the newest addition to their hardsuits would fail, but calmed down fast. If that happened, Charlie Team, who besides disrupting enemy communication, was responsible for monitoring the enemy, would give them a call. The newest addition to their hardsuits, called by the scientists the Veil, was a new piece of equipment that would hack into wireless cameras and freeze the picture as long as they were in reach of it. It worked only for cameras within a radius of 7 meters, and the signal of the Veil was unable to penetrate walls. The last point was actually a benefit, in Niles's opinion. After all, it would be hard to explain why a guard stopped mid-step on another floor when the people sitting before the security monitors saw the frozen picture. They finally arrived at the door to the staircase, and Niles positioned himself on one side of it, while George did the same on the other side. Meanwhile, Anya had positioned herself in front of the door, her rifle at shoulder height ready to secure the staircase. With a final glance, Niles checked if she was ready. When he saw that she was, he took his left hand off his rifle and laid the palm of his hand flat on the door. The orange light of his Omni tool flared up as a hacking program started automatically to open the door. A soft ping was the only warning before the hacking program finished and the door opened, disappearing into the wall. Without missing a beat, Anya was through the door and checked everywhere for hidden guards. Not seeing any, she took a few steps back, leaving the staircase to rejoin her team in the corridor. She turned in the direction Niles was looking and nodded sharply, telling him that there was nobody. He returned the nod and took a step back, turning 90 degrees on his feet to face the staircase himself. He went through the door, and Anya and George took their positions in their formation. The staircase was narrow, and if Niles had to describe it, he would call it a service ladder rather than a proper staircase. But it was to be expected since the personnel inside the building usually used the elevator. But that wasn't an option. If the elevator moved without anyone in it, the guards would get suspicious, and the veil wouldn't help them there. They arrived at the end of the staircase, and Niles held up a fist, signaling the rest of the team to stop. He activated his Omni tool to activate the audio amplifier function of his helmet to hopefully detect if there were enemies on the other side of the exit door. Since they couldn't just open the door without knowing if there was someone, it was their best chance. After Niles had activated the function, he closed his eyes to concentrate. He stood there silently for almost a minute, controlling his breathing, listening for any sounds. Just as he was about to give the all-clear sign, he heard something from the other side of the door. It was faint, but luckily it repeated one more time, and Niles could identify it, having heard it often enough during his training for stealth infiltrations. It was the sound of two armor parts rubbing at each other. Those sounds happened if someone's hard suit wasn't form-fitting or designed for stealth and the wearer didn't stand still. When someone moved their weight from one foot to the other, their legs brushed against each other and created the sound that Niles had just heard. His teammates had noticed that he had clenched his still raised fist harder and tensed in their positions, ready to spring into action. Yet Niles didn't give any orders, his mind racing to figure out how to approach this situation. The only thing he knew for sure was that at least one person was on the other side. It could be two, or it could even be three. Without any means to check how many guards were there, they would have to do this almost completely blind. In the end, they had no choice but to press forward. They couldn't accomplish their mission by staying here. And it wasn't like they hadn't trained for situations like this. He unclenched his fist and began to signal his team about the minimum of one enemy on the other side of the door, and that they would use the quicken down formation to take him and everyone else down. He didn't take his eyes off the door but felt the tap on his back, Anya signaling him that she and George understood the plan. Niles moved to the left side of the door, pressing himself to the wall to clear enough space for his teammates. With deft hands, he exchanged his rifle for his silenced pistol. The short weapon didn't have the same stopping power as his rifle, but it would be more than enough. Besides, using a smaller weapon in close combat was more practical. He watched as his team got in position and nodded to himself when he saw that George had changed his weapon to his pistol. Then he looked to Anya, who stood between them with her left arm raised and glowing orange from her activated Omni tool, waiting for his command to open the door. Once he gave the command, the action happened so fast that not even 5 seconds went by before everything was finished. Anya pressed her arm forward, lightly touching the door before her arm snapped back to raise her rifle, ready to secure the front. The door split in the middle and opened, its halves sliding smoothly into the wall. With barely enough space to move, Niles and George raised their pistols and turned around the edges of the door. Before his mind had the chance to comprehend what Niles had seen, his body had corrected the aim of his pistol to the helmeted head of a Cerberus guard. At the same moment, his finger had pressed the trigger, and a soft pop announced the firing of a shot. Simultaneously, the scene was repeated behind him by George. As the body began to drop to the floor, Niles's left arm snapped forward to grab it, stopping it from falling to avoid the noise it would make if the armor hit the floor. Quickly, he holstered his gun to use his right hand to hold the body up. When he had the body secured in his grip, he began to drag the body to the staircase. He grimaced when he noticed that there were no places to hide a body effectively, let alone two. Still, they had no choice but to dump the dead guards here. The only other option would have been to carry the bodies with them until they found an unused room, and that was at best a stopgap solution. Time wasn't on their side. The bodies they had hidden on the ground floor could be found any time, and by that time Niles wanted to be inside the server room, already downloading as much as they could. Niles made a decision and let the body fall to the ground. They just had to hope that nobody would use the staircase instead of the elevator. He stepped outside into the hallway, and he saw how Anya had her Omni tool pointed at a camera on the ceiling. When she noticed him, she lifted her right index finger up and moved it in a circle, telling him that she was currently manipulating the video feed of the camera. After she finished, it would show how the two dead guards would still stand to the side of the door to the staircase, even when they moved out of the range of the veil. Just as George stepped out too, Anya finished her work, and they got ready to continue. Their way to the next staircase that would take them was uninterrupted. The only time they stopped had been when they came across the entry to the room where most of the guards slept. Niles took the time to place a small device on the upper door frame that would only send a signal and picture to his HUD when somebody went through the door and the invisible laser it sent down. Yet they were making good time and didn't meet any other Cerberus personnel until they arrived in the second basement. Unlike what had happened at the door to the first basement, Niles hadn't heard anything unusual, even if he had been extra cautious and waited for 2 full minutes. Fortunately, when they stepped into the hallway, no guard had stood outside of Niles' hearing range that could have been alerted by their entrance. Niles mentally recalled the map of the place that Intel had acquired. After confirming which way they had to go, he signaled his team that they would walk down the right half of the corridor. Just before they arrived at the corner to the corridor, where the server room was, Niles spotted a sign over a large door. It read Morgue, and Niles had to think of the reason why Cerberus would need a morgue in this research facility and what they would find there when they searched through the place more thoroughly. Yet that was a question for the time when they had finished their primary task. As they stood hidden behind the corner, Niles grabbed at the small nicked tube that had been fixed to his left breast. He pulled the tube away from his chest and expanded the attached cable through his action. The tube was nothing special, only a video camera that saved its recordings in the internal computers of his hardsuit. But it had one function that would come in handy right now. With a quick command of his Omni tool, Niles opened a small window on his HUD that showed the live broadcast of the camera. Due to the fact that the top of the camera was Nick's, Niles could use it to peek around the corner without any part of his body showing. What he saw nearly caused him to swear loudly. There was one guard standing at the end of the one-way corridor. But that was what Niles had expected. He would be no problem. One precise shot, and it would be over. No, what he was angry to see was that there was one camera that was outside of the range of the veil if the program he had run over the video was correct. He turned to his two and communicated what he had seen and the problem they faced. The only solution to avoid detection by the camera came from Anya, who suggested they use a signal amplifier to boost the range of the veil. Even if it would be suspicious when the signal strength of the other electronic devices fluctuated, it would only be for a few seconds. The men watching the surveillance monitor would probably think it was just their imagination. Tired people made mistakes, that was a fact. They would have to move fast, but their plan was doable. Anya would activate the signal amplifier, while Niles would take the shot to take the guard out. The moment they were in range for the veil to work normally, Anya would deactivate the amplifier and then make sure that the camera showed a picture with the guard still standing in front of the door. A single nod was all that was needed to show that they were ready. With Anya's Omni tool ready, Niles held up 3 fingers to show the countdown. When his last finger went down, they sprung into action. The Cerberus guard had only enough time to begin to lift his weapon before a high-speed bullet tore through his helmet and lodged itself into his head, stopping his barely formed thought of defending himself. Not caring that their steps were louder than usual, they moved fast towards the server room door. And when Niles threw a look back, he saw that Anya had already deactivated the signal amplifier and was instead pointing her Omni tool at the camera, hacking it while she moved. Niles arrived at the door and dragged the body to the side, making it easier for Anya to approach it. By the time he did, Anya had already finished with the camera and was crouching before the door to the server room with her Omni tool still activated. It took her only 20 seconds before she circumvented the locking and alarm mechanism, and the door slid open soundlessly. Anya went through first and stopped just a step beyond the doorstep to check if there were more people inside the room. She took a step back so that Niles could see her head and nodded to show that the room was clear. Niles still had his hands on the dead guard and began to drag him into the room. When he entered the room, Niles let the body fall to the side with just enough distance between it and the door for a person to stand. He didn't handle the body with his usual care, but he was currently more interested if Anya had already managed to gain access to the servers. As he went along the rows of computers, he took a moment to take a look around the room. There were only 5 rows, but they spanned the whole length of the room and were as high as a man. Between each row was enough space to walk and turn around comfortably to access the computers on each side. And that was what Anya was currently trying. She stood on the far end of a row and the light of an interface illuminated her helmet. Before he walked toward her, he threw one last look to the door to see George walking backward into the room, his rifle at the ready until the door closed before him. George saw him, lowered his rifle, and raised his left hand. His ring finger and thumb made a circle while the rest of his fingers pointed straight up. That way, he gave Niles to understand that he placed a short-range camera outside of the server room to observe the hallway and see if enemies closed in on them. He positioned himself by the door and relaxed against the wall next to it, keeping an eye on the video for any suspicious activity. If anything happened, George would hold them back until Niles and Anya could come to help. The location of the server room was both an advantage and a disadvantage. Enemies would come only from one direction, so they wouldn't have to worry about getting flanked or hit in the back if they were attacked. But at the same time, it would be hard to withdraw if it became too much. If it came to that, it would be hard to fight their way out, but still doable for their team in Niles's mind. They had the training and the abilities. Furthermore, they had the support of 6 more N5 soldiers who were just as good as them. With quick steps, Niles made his way toward Anya, who was tipping fervently on the holographic console before her. He stopped beside her and looked at the interface where rows upon rows of computer code ran over the screen. While computers were not his specialty, Niles still understood enough to know that Anya was still trying to get around the security systems. His right hand came up to his head, and Niles tipped 2 times at the side of his helmet, activating his loudspeaker to talk to Anya normally. "Are you making progress?" he asked, his voice slightly rough from not using it for so long. For a moment, Anya's tipping speed lowered, but she didn't stop when her hand snapped to her helmet to activate her loudspeaker. "The systems here are different from the rest of the building," Anya explained. "It wouldn't surprise me if the person who created these security features was someone else. Every programmer has a distinct style, and from their style, you can tell who it is and how good they are. And this one is way more talented than the one who created the security for the rest of the building. If I had to make a comparison between them, then it would be store-bought versus commission work." "How much more time do you need?" asked Niles, not even a shred of doubt in his mind that Anya would be able to bypass the security. "None," said Anya and hit one last key. The screen changed with her press of a key. The lines of code disappeared, and in their place, neat rows of digital folders appeared. "Everything is here," said Anya smugly. "From here we can access every bit of information that is saved on the servers. There is a connection to another network off-planet, so I guess theoretically I could get access to their main network. But to get into that, well, that's something completely different. I only took a quick look and was almost caught." "Shouldn't that be impossible?" questioned Niles. "I mean, connecting to their main network, Charlie teams should interfere with their communication." "They should, but the data connection is independent of the communication network. Their communication runs side by side with those of the colony, but the amount of data that goes in and out of this place is too big to keep it hidden from the authorities. So they have an extra satellite dish somewhere they use for the servers. Can they use it for communication?" "In theory, yes," answered Anya, "but it is easier to use the network of the colony. Safer too. You have to understand that the bandwidth of the satellite dish isn't that big to begin with. It's barely large enough that files can be sent and received. Furthermore, it's slow. The only thing they could do is send text messages." "All right. How goes the download?" "It is a lot of data, probably too much for me to save on my intern data memory. I haven't begun the download yet. I'm still trying to decrypt their classification system. They use a combination of letters and numbers that I haven't seen before, but it bears a resemblance to one the Alliance uses. Civilian or military? Military, answered Anya. Even if Niles couldn't see it, he knew that Anya had a frown on her face. He knew it because he had the same expression hidden by his helmet. Do you know the security level of the Alliance code this one is based on? Asked Niles. It's an OSC-08, an officer code. Not that high up, but still. If they have people at the officer level, the AIS will make sure that they have only access to secret information they want them to know. Counter-espionage tactics at their finest, right, Commander? Yes, the AIS knows their stuff in and out, chuckled Niles lightly. Then his expression changed to something more serious. I just wish that we wouldn't have to use them on our own people. Humans have fought enough among each other. We should concentrate our efforts on the other species. I would call it human nature, said Anya, not taking a break from tipping, but I'm sure that the other species have the same problems. People want power, and they believe that they are the only ones that know how that power should be used. Those from Cerberus believe just that. I read the latest briefing on their ideology. They think that the Alliance is playing too nice with the Citadel, and that us joining them was a terrible mistake. I read that one too, said Niles. It would be interesting to know how much the leadership of Cerberus knows about what's going on behind the scenes. Even we N5 know that the top brass is not interested in staying under the Council's wing. It's only a matter of time until we can stand toe-to-toe with any Council race, or even the whole Council. That's the goal, Commander, but that moment is still ways off. Before Niles could respond to her statement, Anya's Omni-tool played a short melody. A screen opened above her left arm and displayed a few lines of code that Niles couldn't see clearly from his position. Anya's head didn't even tilt in its direction, but Niles knew that her eyes flew over the displayed information ever so often. The speed of her hands flying over the keyboard increased in such a way that it seemed like her fingers were nothing but a blur. When she slowed down, a new window opened on both the interface of the server and the screen of her Omni-tool, showing the progress of an ongoing download. I got a partial decryption. It's not perfect, but at least I can identify the type of files they saved. Currently, I'm downloading every file that is marked with CQ3LD. Those should be those that report the progress of the research done in this facility. I can't find out who exactly gets these reports, but it's definitely someone higher up in the chain of command of Cerberus. Shall I try to find out who? Not yet, Aim, ordered Niles firmly. We can't be sure if it's possible to track you if you try to get the information. Download everything that seems important before you try anything else. We can't let those files get destroyed. Understood, sir. Niles didn't know how long he stood there, watching over Anya's shoulder how she moved file after file to her hard suit's internal memory. It couldn't have been more than 5 minutes before the screen of her still activated Omni-tool suddenly flashed red. Fuck, cursed Anya loud enough that Niles would have heard it even if her loudspeakers were off. What happened? He asked concernedly. Someone started the purge protocol. They're deleting everything. Fuck, repeated Niles Anya's earlier curse. Try to get as much as you can. The more important, the better. I'm going to see if everything's right with George. They're going to swarm the room. Anya didn't even turn his way when he left her to her work. His steps became faster with every step he took, and when he almost arrived at George's position, who stiffened at Niles' approach, a communication link was opened by Bravo Team's leader. Alpha 1, this is Bravo 1. A patrol discovered us, and a silent alarm notified the garrison of our presence. I'm sure they are approaching your position too, informed him Bravo 1, whose name Niles didn't know. Copy that, said Niles. Any problems on your end? Data retrieved. 2 targets apprehended. Position secure, can beat off, replied Bravo 1, using barely enough words to convey his situation. While Niles didn't know how Bravo 1's personality was outside of missions or even who he was, every time they worked together, Bravo 1 would act this way. It didn't matter what kind of situation he was in, be it a shootout or just standing guard over a position. Anytime he talked, he would only say enough so that people could understand what was going on. For example, in just 10 words, Bravo 1 had told Niles that they got most or even all available information about the experiments and research Cerberus was doing in the laboratories on the first and second floor, while, at the same time, taking 2 of their researchers prisoner. Furthermore, they had found a place from where they could defend themselves effectively from any Cerberus attack. A ping on Niles's Omno tool informed him that the light sensor he had placed at the barrack had been tripped, and a short video had been sent to his Omni tool, showing that at least half a dozen guards had gone through the door before the video was interrupted. He cursed inside his mind and said to Bravo 1 loud enough that George could hear him too, "Be advised, multiple hostiles on their way. Prepare for combat." A short copy that was the only response before their communication line was closed. George, who had checked his rifle when he heard Niles, asked, "Do we know how many are coming at us?" Niles shook his head and replied, "At least half a dozen have left their barracks. It could be more, and I don't know if they are coming to us or went to confront Bravo Team." "Any news from Charlie Team?" "No. They're keeping watch outside. If something happens, they will inform us, but keep radio silence otherwise." "Understood." They stood in silence on each side of the door, trying to listen for approaching footsteps. It didn't take long until they did. It sounded like a group was running in their direction. It was impossible for Niles to say how many exactly there were, since they had no way to see the corridor as the door to the server room was closed. "They seem to know that we're here," said George, gripping his rifle tighter. "Do you think they found out about us tampering with the camera?" "It's possible," conceded Niles, narrowing his eyes in contemplation. "Open the door," said Niles, after deciding on a plan of action. George turned his head in his direction, questioningly, but activated his Omni tool to follow Niles's order. "A closed door is a hindrance more to us than them," explained Niles. "We need to know what they're doing, and I don't think we can hack into the camera when they know of us. Besides, I don't like it if we have no way to fight them effectively." The door opened, and not a moment later, a hail of bullets followed, missing George and Niles and burrowing themselves into the wall at the other end of the room. Niles and George held out their rifles into the opening and fired back blind. They weren't confident that they would hit anyone, but that wasn't their intention anyway. This move was to force the enemy into cover, giving them a breather to organize an effective counterattack and to see what they were dealing with. The 2 of them shared a nod before Niles held out his rifle to fire again, ignoring that the heat of his rifle was becoming too much for it to handle before it would go into a forced cooldown. At the same moment, George moved slightly out of cover to look into the corridor and to see where their enemies stood. His head snapped back not a moment too soon as the Cerberus guards returned fire. "I counted 5, 1 down on the floor. I think we got lucky and hit him before they could get into cover. Still, there could be more," said George loudly to be heard over the noise of gunfire. "Activate your thermal sensors," said Niles, making up a plan on the fly. "We cover them in smoke and try to take out as many as possible before they wise up and stay in cover until the smoke is cleared." Both took a smoke grenade from their belts and, on the count of 3, threw them down the hallway. The grenades landed on the floor and rolled a few meters before they exploded in a cloud of smoke. Niles could hear the surprised shouts of the Cerberus guards, and their suppressive fire stopped. George and Niles took this opportunity and leaned out of their cover. Thanks to their activated thermal sensors, the Cerberus guards appeared as blazing figures on their HUDs. With trained precision, they took their shots and downed 3 more enemies before the rest scrambled back into cover. It had been George who had spotted the grenade rolling toward them, and he was also the one to give Niles a rough shoulder check to push him behind the wall. He had barely enough time to throw himself behind the wall before the grenade exploded in a shower of shrapnel. Luckily, the grenade hadn't rolled too close, and most of the explosion was caught by the walls of the hallway. Some of the concussive force went through the open door of the server room, and Niles's head ringed from the loud noise and his unexpected meeting with the floor. But he was alive, and that was what was important. "Damn, that was close. You all right?" called Niles, concerned if George had been hurt. "Everything's peachy, sir," responded George, who was already back on his feet and taking a peek down the hallway. "Seems like the explosion blew most of the smoke away. I see no one, so I'm guessing they are taking a breather too." said George while Niles got up, his legs a bit shaky. When George saw his commander's unsteady stand, he asked, concerned, "Is everything all right with you? You seem a little bit shaky there." "Everything's fine," answered Niles, shaking his head to get rid of the remaining confusion. "What happened?" called a new voice, and to Niles's silent shame, it took him a moment to identify it as Anya's. "Grenade," replied George gruffly. "Don't worry, we're fine." "Did you get everything from the servers?" asked Niles after he positioned himself beside the door. "No. Once they started the purge program, it was impossible to stop it. It was not designed to be stopped once it was activated. The only use the servers have now is donating the metals they're made of for new ones," said Anya as she positioned herself beside him. "So, what's our plan?" "If they want to play catch with explosives," said Niles, "then I think it's our turn." A moment later, all three had a grenade in their hands, this time of the explosive variety. The Cerberus guards had started firing at them again, so Niles had to speak a bit louder to overcome the noise. "Anya, you throw first," Niles started to explain his plan. "After yours went up, George and I will throw ours as well. When they have exploded, we will use run and gun. We storm their position and take out as many as we can before they retreat and move forward at the same time. Understood?" "Understood," answered Anya and George simultaneously. With a flick of her wrist, Anya sent her grenade down the hallway. She had tweaked the activation time and the force of the explosion so that their enemies could see and hear it coming, which was part of their plan. The first grenade was a distraction, a deadly one, but a distraction nonetheless. It was to force them into cover and to mask the next two that George and Niles would throw further into the hallway and thus closer to the Cerberus guards. This tactic would hopefully catch them off guard and further disorient or even take some of them out. They heard a loud shout of "Grenade!" shortly before the explosion happened. Just after the shockwave passed them, George and Niles threw the next two grenades with enough force to reach the end of the hallway and got ready to rush down. They braced themselves for the explosion, pressing themselves close to the wall. The second explosion was barely over when they started to run down the hallway. The tempo was fast, but their rifles were steady. Niles and his team had crossed the distance between the entrance of the server room and the corner of the hallway in less than 10 seconds. They turned around the corner and began to shoot at anyone still standing. It was over in a few seconds. 3 people fell to the ground to never rise again. One of them had already turned around, trying to run away, but even he was shown no mercy. Niles walked slowly forward, checking over the bodies on the ground. He heard a grunt to his left and turned his head to see a Cerberus guard who had been visibly hit by one of the grenades and clung barely to his life. It wasn't something he liked to do, but it wasn't like it was kinder to just let him be. The man would be dead in a short time, so Niles saw it as mercy rather than a cold-blooded execution when he put a bullet in his head to end his suffering. Sometimes you had to do things in this line of work that churned one's stomach. "Clear! Clear!" called George and Anya after checking their surroundings. "Good. Keep an eye out and the ears open for more while we make our way up," ordered Niles. His teammates answered affirmative and got into their usual position behind Niles. They moved through the hallways fast but carefully. They had just passed the room labeled as morgue when a transmission came from Charlie 1. "To all team leads, multiple shuttles just took off a few hundred meters west from our position. It seems like Cerberus evacuated the facility. Be advised, there could still be some Cerberus personnel on the site. Charlie 2 is currently hacking into their security systems. When we know more, I'll contact you again." Niles had stopped in the middle of the hallway when Charlie 1 told him of the shuttles, and he felt the confused looks of his team on his back. He still faced forward when he started to tell his team what happened. "I just got a call from Charlie 1, began Niles. "Multiple shuttles took off in the distance, so the assumption is that Cerberus fled the building. But don't relax just yet. We don't know if there are still some of them around." "Is there some change in our plan, or are we still en route to the evac point?" asked Anya. "If Cerberus truly did evac the facility, I think we can investigate a bit more before joining the other teams. I'm curious what we will find in the morgue we just passed. If you have anything against it, say it now, and we will move toward the meeting point." I'm for it, answered Anya immediately. I'm curious too. I haven't got the time to look over the files I downloaded from the servers. The only thing I know is that they researched something that has to do with biotics. Meanwhile, George just shrugged, not showing a preference for either option. Biotics? Inquired Niles, while they turned around to make their way back to the morgue. Yes, said Anya, I could only read some headlines. But it seems like they tried to research how biotics develop in a human body, and perhaps how it would be possible to influence the development of azonodes. So we will probably find the bodies of their test subjects, concluded George, who had been listening in on their information exchange. That is most likely, confirmed Anya with a hint of sadness in her voice. It wasn't like she was unused to death or even shaken by it anymore. She had to kill often enough to be desensitized to it, and she could distance herself from her actions. Yet that only applied when it happened during combat situations. The loss of life outside of it just seemed like a waste to her, something unnecessary. That was one of the reasons why she stayed with the military when they offered her a position as a field agent for the AIS. She knew a lot about what happened behind the scenes, but if she was honest, she didn't want to know what truly happened in the darkest shadows. When they arrived at the door to the morgue, a wink with Niles' Omni tool was enough to open it. He and Anya walked into the room while George waited in the doorframe, keeping the door open and an eye out for anyone approaching them. The room looked as clean as one expected. If his helmet didn't block smells, Niles was sure that the room would smell heavily of aggressive detergents. The middle of the room was occupied by two stainless steel tables, with one of them empty, and on the other was what was obviously a human body covered by a white sheet. At the other end of the room was another door, plastered with hazard signs, ranging from biohazard to radioactive. This was one door Niles didn't want to open until he had no other choice. It would be better to just take note of it and to call in a team specialized for this kind of situation. On the right side of the room, closer to the other side than to the entrance, was another table on which a computer stood. Anya had already started to walk toward it before Niles was even finished taking a look at the whole room. She pulled the stool that stood before the table back and sat down on it while at the same time starting the computer and connecting it to her Omni tool. If she found something important, Anya would let him know, so Niles continued to check out the room. The opposite wall, the wall to his left, was the most interesting one to him, and perhaps the most disturbing. Slow steps moved him forward until he stood directly before it. 3 rows with 6 units each, that was how many cold storage units he saw, and only 3 of them were empty. The number was easy to guess, since only 3 units didn't have a folder that was attached to the hatch. Niles took one of the folders and opened it. It was a medical record that probably belonged to the woman inside the unit. Old style, huh? Muttered Niles to himself while he read through some of the files inside the folder. The first few pages were nothing out of the ordinary. Name, age, place of birth, old diseases, everything that a standard medical record should have. Yet the later pages were anything but ordinary. They documented how Cerberus had recruited the now dead woman. Rather, a better word to use would be bought, thought Niles, mildly disgusted. Her name had been Nicole Ferdian, and she came originally from one of the megacities on Earth, New Phoenix to be exact. She, like so many others, didn't have an easy life there. It was easy to forget that living in a mega city wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, no matter how grand or beautiful the city looked. If you fell off the grid, then chances were high that you woke up with no memories and fewer organs than before. Nicole had been one of the unlucky ones born off the grid. Her whole life had been one big struggle to stay alive and support her 3 younger siblings after their parents' passing. So when somebody came along offering to pay for their education and finding them work outside the slums, was it surprising that she took the offer? She sold herself to buy a better chance for her family. Niles put the file back into its place before taking another one, skipping the personal information to jump ahead to the documentation of her recruitment. He had finished 3 more files, and they told a similar story every time. Desperation was the common theme in all of them. The circumstances differed, but were ultimately the same. Be it for their family or themselves, they all went with Cerberus on the promise of a better future. Just as Niles put away the latest file he had read, Anya said, "Commander, you should probably see this." Even through the speakers of her helmet that distorted her voice, Niles could hear that there was something that disturbed Anya. It took him only a moment until he stood at her right shoulder, looking down at the computer screen. One look was enough to recoil in disgust, and Niles had to force himself not to turn away. On the computer screen were pictures of an autopsy of a young woman who couldn't be older than her mid-20s. To the left of the pictures was a transcript detailing everything the coroner did and what he found. "What am I looking at?" asked Niles after he briefly skimmed the transcript. "We were lucky that this computer was disconnected from the servers and that the coroner saved his files locally as well. And what you're looking at is the proof that Cerberus will use everything you have, even in death," answered Anya tensely. "All the women down here died because they were exposed to too much Ezo. Cerberus tried to find out what consequences happen when the human body is exposed to Ezo and how much is too much. But that isn't why you called me over, is it? I know that the Alliance is conducting similar studies. They just don't expose people to Ezo deliberately, as far as I know." "No, it is only part of the reason," agreed Anya before she took a deep breath and continued, "It has something to do with what is behind that door." Almost casually, she threw her arm out to point at the sealed door, not looking away from the computer screen, and Niles felt how something heavy settled inside his stomach. "What have you found?" he asked, almost afraid to do so. "Most of the women were pregnant during the time of their death," said Anya flatly, like all emotions had left her for a moment. "Pregnant?" repeated Niles, barely believing his ears. "Yes," answered Anya, her voice still devoid of emotion. "Only 2 weren't. The coroner's files call them the control subjects. It seems like the human body is even more susceptible to Ezo during pregnancy than any other time. Probably the reason why some children are born with the ability to use biotics even when their mothers came into contact with Ezo only very briefly. So they tried to figure out how biotics develop during pregnancy," summarized Niles. "I guess their goal was to create them artificially and perhaps find ways to strengthen them. Everything I found points in that direction. The only question is now, what happened to the children?" asked Niles, dreading the answer Anya would give him. "There are none," said Anya, her voice tinted by sadness and grief. "They all died with their mothers. Not one took even a single breath." "And I can guess where their remains are," Niles spat while looking to the left at the door with too many danger signs. "You would have guessed right with that," confirmed Anya with a slight growl. "They too became test subjects in death. The exposure to too much Ezo mutated them and warped their features. From what I've read, some of them don't even look like human babies anymore. I couldn't bring myself to open the files just yet. I'm afraid of what I'm going to see." "You won't have to," said Niles, putting a hand on her shoulder to comfort her. "Make copies of everything, just to be safe. And after that, we will meet up with the other teams. A different team can do the cleanup." Anya nodded slightly and began to initialize the download. In the meantime, Niles went over to join George at the door to the morgue. George acknowledged him with a nod and said, "Didn't see or hear anything indicating that Cerberus troops are lying in wait for us. But I've heard what you and Anya were talking about. Heavy shit, right?" Yes, it is," said Niles. "When this mission is over, I definitely need a drink." "Me too," chuckled George and then added, "But Anya probably needs it the most." "True, that she does," confirmed Niles, a small smile playing on his lips, thankful for George's ability to lift one's spirit even just slightly when they needed it. They fell into a comfortable silence while they waited for Anya to finish. Yet George broke that silence by asking the question every subordinate asked their leader. "So, first round's on you?" Chapter 18. September 14, 2167. 1423. Local time. Benning, Euler System, Jaunt, Capital, Dr. Konstantin Shale. "Fascinating, morbid, but fascinating," muttered Dr. Konstantin Shale to himself while he read the files sent to him from his contact person inside the Alliance Arendal department. They were copies of files recently recovered from a Cerberus facility that researched the development of biotics during pregnancy. Their findings were useless to him. Well, at least for now, he hadn't come around to take a closer look at biotics just yet, so his knowledge about the subject was at best rudimentary. Yet, even by just glancing at the files, he could see that the work done by the Cerberus scientists was sloppy and rushed. Their way of doing things would bring results in a short time, but would claim a lot of lives in the process. One didn't start somewhere with a high number and halved it for every other test subject. At best, it would just give one a bounded interval in which the saved number for the amount of EZO to use is. In Konstantin's mind, this procedure was just guesswork and hoping to get lucky. It would bring results quickly but would waste a lot of resources also. And that was something that was unnecessary in times of peace. It wasn't like Konstantin was against this method. He just didn't see the need for it when they had the time to take their research slowly. No matter what Cerberus said, humanity wasn't at war against anyone, or at least not in a war that made the use of methods outside of the rules necessary. Neither the shadow war between the intelligence services of the galaxy nor the fight against the Batarian-sponsored pirates was serious enough to threaten humanity and the Alliance as a whole. It wasn't like they were facing a war against an enemy hell-bent on eradicating their whole species. And now that Konstantin had seen a report on how Cerberus research was conducted, he was glad that he never called the recruiter back. He found it quite funny how things turned out after he had finished his second doctorate. The first to approach him was a representative of the Alliance Research Department. It wasn't a bad offer per se, but it wasn't the kind of offer that Konstantin was looking for. Government agencies had too many rules and regulations to be truly effective, and he had no desire to fill out hundreds of forms every time he needed something, or to be denied something because it was too expensive. Besides, they would probably not like his tendency to try to bend the rules until they were technically still intact, but stretched to their maximum. Furthermore, he wanted to be paid well. Konstantin liked to enjoy his luxuries, and working for the Alliance wouldn't give him that. Not a day after he had denied the Alliance recruiter, one from an organization called Cerberus showed up on his doorstep, presenting him with a much more generous offer. High pay, unlimited resources, no rules and regulations. The only thing that mattered were results. It was like the dream job for any scientist with loose morals. Yet Konstantin had hesitated to accept the offer, asking for some time to think it over. It wasn't the fact that the offer came from a shady organization that he never heard of before, or that they would ask him to do things that others would shy away from. He knew that he was the kind of person that could sacrifice another in the name of science and progress. But that wasn't the problem. It was that he liked to work inside the rules, finding loopholes, bending them, proving them to be unnecessary. It was a challenge to do all that, and there was nothing that Dr. Konstantin Shale liked, no loved, more than a good challenge. Yet Cerberus's offer had been the best he got, and he was making up his mind to accept it when he got an invite from Oscar Dennebrand's office. Not as the newly appointed Minister of Economy, but as the businessman and supporter of scientific advancement. Konstantin had instantly bought a ticket to Terra Nova, where the main headquarters of Ad Astra was located, completely ignoring any other obligations. There was a saying in the science community that said, "If the stars are calling, you better run to meet them." Almost everyone he knew that had experience in Ad Astra's specific field of work and research, be it astroengineering or weapons development, had sent an application to them, hoping, no, praying to be chosen for the job. Very few people had been actively recruited by Ad Astra, and every single one of them became famous for their accomplishments. The most famous among them had to be Dr. Takahashi Hoshiyume, the creator of the DR drive. Nobody knew much about his current life or where he even lived, but Konstantin had visited a guest lecture of his on the basic principles behind FTL travel. It had nothing to do with his own field of expertise, but he wanted to see the man that changed the way humanity traversed the stars for centuries to come. From his appearance alone, one would never suspect Dr. Hoshiyume to be capable of what he did. But when he started to talk about his work, his demeanor changed to one of confidence and competence. That, in the genuine gratefulness whenever he talked about his employer, made Constantine curious enough to try to find out more about Ad Astra and the man behind it. He knew the general information, of course, but since his main field of research wasn't in the same direction, he hadn't looked deeper into the company. Most of the information had been public knowledge about Ad Astra and its owner Oscar Denebren, nothing that couldn't be found out by one simple search on the internet. Yet, if someone was more persistent, one would find out that every single department chief had been scouted, many of them by Oscar Denebren personally. And every time that happened, it would only take a year or two, 3 at most, before they showed results that skyrocketed the value of Ad Astra and its associated companies. Furthermore, Constantine had dug out old articles from the time when Dr. Hoshiuma started to work for Ad Astra. Most of them, even those written by members of the scientific community, had ridiculed Dr. Hoshiuma for his theories and research, while calling Oscar Denebren a madman that threw money at a project that was fated to fail. Seeing the amount of money the development of the DR drive had swallowed before there was even a prototype had been an eye-opener for Constantine. There was a man out there that looked far into the future and wasn't afraid to risk his money, perhaps even all his possessions, on projects that others called ludicrous. Yet in the end, it was Oscar Denebren who was right, and that happened every time he scouted someone. Perhaps it would take a few years, but it would happen without fail. Like so many others, Constantine had dreamed of being scouted by him during research for his first doctorate. But since his field was in another direction, it stayed a dream. At least, he thought it would stay that way. In a matter of minutes after he had walked into a meeting room at Ad Astra's headquarters, he accepted their offer of leading a newly founded team in the field of genetic manipulation and the enhancement of the abilities of the human body. A position that reflected his abilities and the support of one of the wealthiest businessmen in the Alliance. What could one want more? Constantine was given a laboratory in the growing city of Gaugen, the capital of Benning, and a single goal to research possible ways to enhance the abilities of the Alliance's soldiers. The only restriction he had was that everything had to stay within Alliance and Citadel regulations, the latter of the two, especially since those were even more restrictive than the former. It was funny in a way. At first, Constantine had rejected the Alliance's offer since he found working for them too restrictive, and now he was working for them anyway, just under another name. For the first 4 months, his work was scrutinized, and there was always someone watching him. Yet nobody reprimanded or complained whenever he bent the rules or tried to find their limits. Rather, it was like they were looking for something like that. In the end, Constantine got a meeting with the big boss after 6 months of working for him. Meeting Oscar Denebren had been an eye-opener for him. At first, he thought that Mr. Denebren would be the typical businessman, ruthless and ambitious, a mix that one needed to get to the top. And just like Constantine thought, Mr. Denebren had both of these characteristics in spades. It was easy to recognize the glint in Mr. Denebren's eyes, since Constantine saw it whenever he looked in the mirror. Yet there was something more to him, and that was when Constantine truly understood how Mr. Denebren climbed to the position he had. The slight smile on his face, the way he held himself, all that and more culminated in a relaxing aura that got one to let their guard down without them noticing. For the first 20 minutes, they just did some small talk and talked a bit about Constantine's progress in his research. And before he noticed it, Constantine talked more freely about his work than he usually did. He relaxed so much during their talk that he didn't even think about why Mr. Denebren wanted to talk to him. Because of that, the sudden change in his posture and behavior caught Constantine unaware. With his guard down, it hit him even harder and brought him out of his equilibrium. Later on, after Constantine found his balance again, he understood that this was the moment the discussion began in earnest. Mr. Denebren questioned him about his morals and ethics, his ambitions, his goals, everything and anything, with detailed questions that suggested that Master Denebren had access to an in-depth psychological profile of Constantine, probably courtesy of Andrew Clark, director of the AIS and a good friend of Mr. Denebren's, as Constantine learned. He didn't know how it happened, but what Mr. Denebren learned about Constantine was enough to offer him an off-the-books research. When he learned that it would be a project that took his current research even further, he was at first surprised, but then realized that this was Mr. Dennerburn's goal from the beginning. Acting on a hunch, Constantine asked him if that was the truth, and he got a confirmation immediately. Not that it surprised him that he got the answer to his question. Mr. Dennerburn didn't strike him as a man who kept such things secret, especially when he already asked him to do something that would get them into trouble with the Citadel if they found out that they were possibly breaking their laws concerning genetic manipulation. Yet that made Constantine even more interested in the project. It wasn't the danger of possible repercussions if they were discovered, but the challenge to not break any rules, staying within them and bending them so much that they held barely. That was what he really wanted to do. Was it a surprise that he accepted the offer? He left the meeting with a feeling of anticipation and purpose. They hadn't told him what his research would be used for yet, but he knew that it would help keep the Alliance, and thus humans, safe. They showed him another lab, hidden under the one he worked in before. It was a clever trick, hiding a secret inside an area with restricted access that was in the middle of a capital city. Anything that the secret laboratory needed, be it energy or a data connection, could be hidden among the needs of a large city, and any materials Constantine needed could be ordered for the lab above without anyone getting suspicious. At least, it was better than a secret lab outside the city boundaries. Come on, Cerberus, what's coming next? A facility on an empty planet? Or an asteroid base? Constantine shook his head and banished all thoughts on Cerberus from his mind. They were not important right now. A beep informed him that his newest sample was ready for testing. And if it went well, the first round of Project Orion would get the green light. And that was something he waited for to happen. November 9th, 2167, 1934. Local time. Shaanxi, Taiyuan, Warehouse District. Luke Vok walked with measured steps between the dark warehouse, one eye and ear, open for anyone who could be following him. That was always a risk when dealing with criminals, and Luke was sure that human criminals were no different than the usual fellows he dealt with. In his mind, Asari were the worst ones. No matter how respectable and elegant they presented themselves, their criminals were just as, if not worse than the Krogans. And that had to count for something, since as a Solarian, Krogans were especially hard on Luke. Yet one could only hear the threat of being flayed by one's mind before even that got old. Besides, Luke had probably heard every kind of threat at least once. Everyone thinks they can push the lone Solarian around until that lone Solarian kills you up close and personal. Still, he liked working with humans. They were interesting. Every human he met was different from the one before. If one met one Turian, one knew all Turians and not just the criminal ones, at least in Luke's experience. Even his own species could be categorized into two groups, the accepted ones and the failures. Most of the galaxy thought that all Solarians were like the typical hyper-intelligent professor, the stereotype the Solarian government liked to propagate. Yet what the galaxy didn't know was that every clutch was tested very early in their life if they had those or other preferable characteristics, and those that didn't were weeded out. They were given a basic education and then sent out into the world to try to find their own way without any chance to ever be considered to have a clutch of their own. Luke belonged to the latter group. For 10 years, he lived on Surkesh and learned, but no matter what he did, in the end, it was not enough for the matriarch of his family, and he was sent to a backwater colony and ordered to help build it up for future generations. At that time, he felt bitter and rebellious. So instead of doing what he was told, he joined a passing merchant's crew as a deckhand and left. What he didn't know at first was that the merchant was actually a smuggler. Nonetheless, he had no desire to return to the backwater colony he just left and continued working for the merchant, learning everything he could from him. And after 5 years, Luke went independent with his own ship. It was a rocky start for him, because while he did know some people from his time learning, it was different being the one making the deals. Yet he preserved and steadily built up his reputation as a trustworthy business partner, and at the same time as someone who didn't take shit from anyone looking to double-cross him. For that alone, he had to walk over more than a few bodies. One of his greatest accomplishments was that he was one of the first people to run the Shaanxi route. The Alliance had just opened the planet at the border to Council space to trade with the rest of the galaxy, A trial run, as they called it, and a year later he was one of the first trying to connect to the underground market there. The reason why he waited for a year was twofold. Firstly, the Alliance and the Council would check every ship crossing into human territory extremely carefully. No one wanted criminals to shed a bad light on their accomplishment. And secondly, Luck wanted to give the local underworld time to prepare themselves for possible new contractors. An independent entrepreneur, as Luck called himself, should have the patience to wait until there was someone who could give him a good deal for the wares he so painstakingly provided without the authorities suspecting anything. Be it drugs, weapons, or anything else that was illegal or heavily taxed, Luck was the person people called to provide them. In fact, he had a long-time contract with a criminal family that was up and coming that he would be their sole provider of red sand for the next year. It was a lucrative deal for him, and Luck didn't believe they would try to swindle him. They seemed like a group that wanted to be seen as respectable, a trait that counted for much, even in the darker sides of society. Everyone wants to do business with someone who stands by their word, rather than someone inclined to kill you instead of paying. Luck had met enough of the latter to know that he definitely preferred the first one. Yet there was one issue that he had to think about that could make his future trips to Shanxi much more difficult. The customs authorities' security got better every time he returned to Shanxi. It wasn't too difficult to get around them, but that could change in the near future if they continued upgrading so fast. Humans are truly interesting, Luke thought, and a small smirk grew on his face. Yet they won't catch up with me for a long time. There are still some tricks that I have up my sleeve. If those on the Citadel can't catch me, what chance do the humans have? A pretty good one, if he was honest with himself. Only his connection to some more understanding customs officers on the Citadel prevented his arrest a few times at the beginning of his career. Still, he grew into his profession and didn't have to call on those connections for a long time. A snort escaped Luck when he thought about the newest security measures at the Citadel. For the allegedly safest place in the galaxy, its security measures were easy to trick if one knew where to look. Luck's steps brought him ever closer to the edge of the warehouse district, and just when he was about to turn into another street that would bring him closer to the gate, he heard a noise behind a few containers that were stacked on top of each other to the side of a dark warehouse. Interested in what was going on, but still cautious, Luck put a hand on his gun and went closer to the containers. He put his back on one of them and slowly edged closer to the corner. After a quick look around the corner, he relaxed and put his hand off his gun. He put a smile on his face, turned around the corner, and asked, "What are you doing there, boy?" A short young boy jumped a bit into the air, surprised at Luck's appearance. He turned towards Luke and watched him with suspicious eyes. After a moment, he seemed to come to the conclusion that Luke was no danger to him, and relaxed. Luke took the moment to observe him. The boy wore clothes that were one or two numbers too big for him, and while they seemed like they had been once well cared for, now they looked like the boy fished them out of the garbage. The light of the lamps that lighted the ways between the warehouses was too weak for Luke to see the features of the boy clearly, and the only thing that he saw was that the boy had arc blonde hair. "What do you think?" the boy responded annoyedly. "I'm trying to get in there to find something to sell." "Stealing something? And you're just telling me that?" asked Luck, baffled. "Sure, why not?" said the boy, shrugging. "It's not like it's your stuff or that you're going to snitch on me." "Well, I don't care that you got right, but why are you thinking that I'm not going to tell the authorities about you?" "'Cause you're a crook, too." "And how do you know that?" Luke asked, honestly surprised that the boy knew that. In response, the boy just shrugged once again and answered, "I just know. I'm good at reading people. And you know the saying, people recognize their ilk." "Ha, didn't know that one. You humans have some interesting sayings," chuckled Luke. "So why exactly are you breaking into this warehouse? A small-time gang stores some of their stuff in there. I'm going to take back what belongs to me." "So, revenge then?" "I rather call it getting even. They took something from me, so I'm going to take something from them." At that, Luke couldn't help but laugh out loud. It was an answer like he would have given. "What's so funny?" the boy asked, more confused than angry. "You just remembered me of myself with that answer. It's one I would have given too." Luke paused for a moment before he asked, "By the way, What's your name? I can't keep calling you boy in my head. The boy took a moment to think about if he wanted to answer, but then decided to do so. Levin, he said. Levin Banks. Nice to meet you, Levin, said Luke and held out his hand. I'm Luke Vach, Salarian entrepreneur extraordinaire. Whatever you want, I'll get it to you. So you're a smuggler, deadpanned Levi as he shook the offered hand. I prefer entrepreneur, countered Luke. Do you still need something because Levin asked and pointed over his shoulder at the warehouse. Still got something to do. Luke thought about that for a moment, asking himself what he wanted from Levin. In the end, he decided to do something that someone from his past once did. I'll help you with that. It's been some time since my last breaking and entering. Levin narrowed his eyes at Luke's offer, not understanding why Luke offered this. Why? He asked tersely. 'Cause I want you to join me after this. I need a new partner. I want to expand more into human space. And since you're human, I thought you have some ideas about what I could do. Besides, while you know my type, I know your type too. And what's my type? You're the type that wants more from life, said Luke. You don't want to stay here for the rest of your life. You want to see the galaxy and not have to deal with small-time gangs anymore. Money, power, and adventure. That's what you want, am I right? Levin was quiet for a moment before he started to smile. I like what you're offering. You got a deal. Wonderful, said Luke and clapped his hands. So let's do this and get on our way. By tomorrow, I want to be out of the system. I still have some deliveries to Ilium to make. By the way, how old are you? 14. Hey, good enough. Don't know about human standards, but by Salarian ones, you're an adult. So let's get this show on the road, Leek said enthusiastically and went towards the warehouse. One short look over his shoulder and he saw Levin was following him eagerly. Somehow I know it's going to be a fun trip, thought Luck. April 4th, 2169. 1423 set. Citadel, Abera Ward. She looked up at the building, trying to steel herself for what was going to happen. It had been years since she felt so nervous. By her count, it had been when she returned from her pilgrimage, and the Admiralty Board discussed if her gift was worthy enough for the fleet. She took one deep breath, and Alia Kadre Vasnima took a step forward towards, hopefully, a new beginning.